Today, we're going to dive into attachment. And in particular, we're going to be looking at attachment anxiety in relationships. This is something that usually comes up for people. And as we dive into healing anxiety, as we start progressing in that journey, this is bound to come up at some point. And so we'll look at anxious attachment today. And this shows up in a lot of different ways. We might get into a scenario where waiting for a text or a call back from someone feels really threatening and anxiety provoking. That might be a cause for your mind to spiral if somebody doesn't respond right away. You might not feel entirely secure in a relationship where you're constantly looking for reassurance that your partner or your spouse, even in non-romantic relationships, that things are okay. So this is generally what we would call attachment anxiety. So it's certainly not random, although it might feel that way if when you're in it, it feels quite overwhelming sometimes. One perspective on how we might look at this is that it's a natural result of how the nervous system and the personality were shaped in early relationships. So that's nothing new based off of what we've talked about in the anxiety breakthrough curriculum and the approach that we're taking. The love and presence that we needed in our development generally isn't consistently available. So our nervous system, our being, our minds, they adapted as a way to try to stay connected, which for a child absolutely 100% means survival. Connection equals survival for the child. When that attachment is insecure, then the child learns to cling or perform or manage the relationship in some way so that they can maintain that connection. So that's what we're going to explore today, how anxiety in attachments and attachment anxiety in relationships plays out, especially in your relationships today, and how you can start to reconnect with something deeper than that anxiety. So let's just define this a little bit further. So I think the simplest way to put anxiety, attachment anxiety, is the fear of being abandoned, fear of being rejected, fear of not being enough to be loved. So in other words, the connection is unstable or insecure. So it can show up in a lot of different ways. Again, checking your phone for responses to a text, let's say. For some people, it might show up as apologizing or people pleasing to keep other people close. In other words, to try to maintain or manipulate that connection so that it can't be lost, or avoiding conflict because you're afraid that it's going to drive somebody away. A lot of us learn that if we confront, if we were too aggressive, if we were too big, if we stated what we wanted, or if we stated what was true for us, then it breaks the connection somehow. So underneath all of the behavior is the body and the nervous system really believing in saying that connection equals survival. And I absolutely cannot risk losing it. That intensity of response or the intensity of that anxiety isn't irrational. It's not random. It's the nervous system remembering old wounds where the love felt conditional or uncertain. The connection wasn't stable itself. So how this forms, we've talked about this before, but we'll dive in specifically on how this applies to attachment anxiety. Is that when we're young, our deepest need, we have a lot of needs, obviously. So we have food, need for toys, sustenance, sleep, all of that kind of stuff. But our deepest need on the most fundamental level was attuned love, meaning we needed to feel seen, safe, and accepted as we were. And that's proven now in child development and psychological circles. When that love was inconsistent, when it was withdrawn, conditional, when it was overshadowed by stress or neglect, or just your caretaker being quite unstable, for a lot of us, that was the case, something essential in us gets interrupted. So the nervous system learns to grip and learns to stay hypervigilant to keep that connection alive. And the second result that happens is more on the soul slash being level, the fundamental level of our being loses touch with basic trust, which we've talked about. That's a module in the anxiety breakthrough curriculum. So it's always good to go back to these lessons because we need to revisit them many times before we really get it. But the soul loses touch with basic trust, meaning we forget or we don't trust in the natural sense that life itself is holding and supporting us. The other thing that we disconnect from is the knowing of essential love, meaning the felt presence of love that is unconditionally here. What happens is that instead of trusting in unconditional love, we start to feel as if or believe that love from our caretakers, from the environment, from the people around us are conditional because that's generally true. Human beings are imperfect, parents are imperfect. So they're not loving unconditionally. And as a result, we manipulate to whatever degree, or we modify ourselves to whatever degree that we need to be able to attain the love or to keep the love that's coming in, which means that we have to people please, we have to fit ourselves inside a particular kind of box. We have to make sure that we have the approval of our environment in order to maintain that connection. And this is, again, where the inner critic develops as a way to maintain that connection. So you see, we're talking about all the same stuff, but we're taking it from a slightly different perspective. If in that we want to look at it through the lens of attachment theory and relationships. So for a lot of us, the inner critic develops as a survival tool to try to maintain connection with our primary caregivers. As adults, that usually gets projected onto our partners, unfortunately. The underlying message is if I were different, then maybe they would stay. Or if you aren't getting the approval or the kudos or the admiration of the other person, if you're not following that set of rules, then the connection is going to be insecure. So this is absolutely an intelligent adaptation that we have to be able to protect the connection that we need when the connection feels fragile or is objectively fragile. So obviously that's all great for children. It's actually a brilliant survival strategy for children. That same survival strategy starts creating suffering for us as adults, right? Because these early patterns will reappear in adult relationships in a lot of these different ways, right? So being insecure when your partner doesn't respond to you right away, right? Maybe 10 minutes pass, 20 minutes pass, like a whole, I don't know, a whole day passes. And then the whole mechanism, internal mechanism starts to ask, did I upset them? Are they leaving me? Is this connection secure? And then it starts the whole mental cycle of anxiety, right? So that has nothing to do with the other person, actually. It's mostly to do with us and how secure we are in knowing that we are securely connected to love itself. So that's like the real misunderstanding is that as children, yes, we need this love to come from our parents and our caretakers. As adults, the idea is that we internalize the connection from our childhoods, and that connection is to love itself within ourselves. So the when we have an insecure attachment, when we have internalized that, then we have this core belief that love might vanish, that is conditional, that I'm about to be dropped somehow. So for a lot of us, where that, if you haven't worked this out, this will tend to create this dynamic where you might be attracted to unavailable partners again and again. This is in a lot of relationship coaching circles or couples counseling circles. You'll see this pattern where somebody might be drawn to people who can't fully meet us. In most of our cases, that's actually who we're drawn to, because unconsciously we are trying to heal these old wounds. We're recreating these old early relationships so that we can heal and we can grow. Now, the issue that most of us have is that we aren't conscious that's happening. We're not conscious of this inner child that's trying to glom onto this other person and have that person meet our unfulfilled needs. And obviously, when that happens, that becomes an issue. And of course, both people are doing that. I always joke when we're in relationships, we're not just in relationship with one other person. We're in relationship with ourselves. We're in relationships with our inner child. Then we're in relationship with the other person, but we're also in relationship with their inner child. And then our inner children are in relationship with each other too. So there's a lot going on, which is why relationships can be so difficult. On the deeper level, of course, what we're talking about is that it's recreating this early dynamic. So the core belief is, if I chase hard enough, maybe this time I'll be able to secure the love that I couldn't before. That ultimately results in a lot of strategies to control the connection, right? So you can just see how often you're trying to maintain the way that somebody is treating you, how they might perceive you, how they might feel toward you, and see how much of that really ties back to the sense of needing to control the relationship, control the connection, control how the engagement is going. So that happens to various degrees. We might overanalyze what somebody's saying. We might replay conversations with our partners. We might silence ourselves to avoid rocking the boat or rocking a secure connection. We might try to overfunction in order to keep somebody close to us. Whatever the behavior is, the cycle will generally feel like, okay, I'm needing connection and I'm wanting connection, but because the internalized connection and attachment is insecure, there's some fear or anxiety that comes up. And most of the time when that comes up, of course, we take it upon ourselves to fix it, or we blame ourselves for the connection being insecure. This is a natural development of children, usually take it on themselves, saying it's my fault that this connection isn't here, isn't unconditional. I have to be doing something in order to maintain this. So when we see it this way, anxious attachment is not an overreaction, right? It's not an oversensitivity. It's actually in the nervous system still being wired to survive, meaning it's wired to maintain connection. And our anxious personality is built around the belief that I'll only be okay if that connection with ABC person, you name it, whoever it is in your life, is okay. So what gets covered in all of this sort of reactivity is the ground of our being, meaning the ground of trust and unconditional love. We want to talk about how to get back to that, right? What are the pathways to healing this and reconnecting with basic trust and unconditional love? As it's not about pushing the anxiety away or trying to control the connection so that we never have to feel anxious. It's remembering what your nervous system has forgotten, what your soul and the fundamental nature of your being has forgotten, which is that life itself, presence itself, is capable of holding us. That's actually what is needed to come in. And that love, and this is probably the most important part, that love itself in its purest form is not transactional. It's not something that we have to earn, but instead it's a presence that is unconditional, meaning we don't have to do anything to earn it. We don't have to do anything to receive it. In fact, it's fundamentally part of who we are. Now, a lot of us, because of the way that we developed and because of the insecure attachment that we internalized, we don't really know that. And so healing attachment anxiety means that we're giving the nervous system this kind of consistent, attuned presence that it missed, and letting the soul rediscover basic trust and essential love. Now, again, what does this mean? It means that it's utterly important for us to be in touch with our inner children. They are here no matter what. Likely, if you are early in this work, if you're in the middle of this work, if you're in the late stages of this work, your inner children are always needing this kind of presence. So, of course, the problem is in relationships that we are looking for the other person or our partners to take care of our inner children. Most of the time, if we really dissect it and we really go through a discernment process, you'll be able to feel, oh, this is my inner child who is not sure that this other person is still going to love me because of XYZ, because of how I am, because of the situation, because I didn't do this, because I didn't finish my to-do list, because I didn't say the right thing, whatever it is. And then you have the other person on the other side with their attachment style. And then, of course, that causes its own dynamics. So how do we do this? Again, it's all about grounding in the present moment, right? So bringing the nervous system back, bringing yourself back to regulating the nervous system. And one of the things that we can do is really in the moment contact how it's okay right now, how we're being supported right now, and reconnecting continually back to unconditional love. If you really look at your self-talk, if you really look at the way that you treat yourself, if you really look at the way that you are with yourself, I think very few of us can say that we unconditionally love ourselves, right? So that's what we are wanting to practice, meaning there's unconditional love and acceptance and compassion and presence and attunement to ourselves. We don't expect anybody else to do that for us. That's one of the hardest things in the healing journey, is that we really want somebody else to do that work for us. And a lot of times we're frustrated, we're mad, we're skeptical, we're hateful because we didn't get that in our environment, from our parents, from our environment, from the culture, whatever it is. And that's one of the hardest parts of actually becoming a real adult, a real functioning, spiritually mature human being, an emotionally mature human being, is actually owning the fact that we have our inner children that have their own unmet needs, and that it's actually up to us to meet those needs now. So these small recognitions of really being with the inner child and really providing attunement and consistency for your inner child until they really get that unconditional love is here. And it's not just your unconditional love, it's the really getting that unconditional love is the nature of who you are and who your inner child is. Okay, that takes a little bit of a process, but of course, that's what we're working on here. So it's all about starting with awareness. And we start with the awareness of anxiety, right? That's why I always say anxiety is such a great signal pointing to something that requires or needing some attention in us, usually our inner children. So, as children, again, just as a summary before we close here, our safety depended on connection. So, we formed behaviors of clinging, anxiety, people pleasing, controlling, perfectionism, all of the behaviors around needing to maintain a secure connection. And as adults, when we're in relationships, especially, that these patterns will keep us locked up in fear and anxiety and actually prevent us from being in healthy relationships. So the key is reconnecting ourselves and our inner children back to basic trust and the awareness and contact with unconditional love. We don't need to shame ourselves for being anxious. We don't need to shame ourselves from being fearful about our connection with our partners or our spouses. It's really a matter of being aware of the anxiety itself, letting yourself feel the shakiness of the connection and turning inward so that you can really be present to the inner child who's actually the one that's really freaked out about it. So, my recommendation for this week, if you want to explore this further, is again, just notice where you are anxious in your relationships. When does this come up for you? When do you feel like you might be clingy, where you might feel uncertain about where the other person's at, or you feel like you have to do something in order to get the approval or the love from another person when you think the other person's love is conditional, right? So as you move through the week, just notice when that anxiety arises and come back to, again, this is the process. You can call it a 3-step process, right? Step 1, regulate the nervous system, breathe, ground, do whatever it is that you found helpful for yourself. 2, really bringing your attention to the inner child and bringing presence to the inner child who's probably a little freaked out that it's going to be rejected, abandoned, not loved, all of the things. Usually, if we're really attuned with that, that will bring up some memory in us and some emotion, some feeling that we have not had a chance to process yet. The more that we do that work, the more integrated the inner child gets and the less reactive it is. He or she might then start to really trust that they are unconditionally loved or that they don't need to be doing all of these things or don't need to be scared that they're going to be abandoned. Right? So, again, step by step, lots of compassion, take a breath at a time, come back to yourself. And as you become more and more conscious of it and bring more and more attention and attunement to your inner child, that anxiety will absolutely soften into trusting love, presence, compassion, and trusting that is actually who you are. All right. So I hope this was helpful. If you're watching on replay, feel free to drop comments in, and then I will open this up to Q&A if anybody has any questions. Okay. Right. Take care.
Bye.